In this podcast episode, Ben Shapiro discusses the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas, as well as the international response to the situation. He begins by referencing a famous comic from 2014 by cartoonist AF Branco, which depicts then Secretary of State John Kerry sitting between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and a member of Hamas, with the Hamas member holding a baby strapped with dynamite and a paper reading, "Death to all Jews." This comic serves as a commentary on the ongoing conflict and the lack of balance in the international response. Shapiro then highlights a recent interview with Representative Pramila Jayapal, where she downplays the systematic rape of Israeli women by Hamas, citing the need for balance in addressing the situation. He also discusses the new reports emerging from hostages about their experiences in Gaza at the hands of Hamas, including being starved, beaten, and drugged. The podcast delves into the Biden administration's response to the conflict, criticizing their demands for Israel to do a better job protecting civilians, and their encouragement for Israel to restore humanitarian aid into Gaza. Shapiro argues that this approach creates a no-win scenario for Israel, as they are pressured to meet unreasonable demands while facing attacks from Hamas. The discussion then shifts to the international response to the conflict, with Shapiro highlighting the Gallup poll, showing a partisan breakdown in support for Israel's military action in Gaza. He points out that the Democratic Party's base is showing sympathy for terrorism, as evidenced by their support for sending more humanitarian aid to Palestinians and their opposition to Israel's actions against Hamas. Shapiro also addresses acts of intimidation and violence in response to the conflict, such as protesters threatening a Jewish-owned falafel shop in Philadelphia and disrupting campus activities at Cornell University and Brown University. He emphasizes the pattern of caving to the demands of anti-Israel groups on college campuses and the impact of this behavior on free speech and academic freedom. The podcast continues with a discussion about the recent referendum in Venezuela, where the president of the National Electoral Council, Elvis Amoroso, claimed that about 10.5 million votes were cast. However, there was confusion surrounding the tally, as an opposition politician suggested that each voter cast a total of 5 votes, one for each question on the referendum related to Venezuela's claim. The Maduro government denied seeking justification to invade or annex the territory, but the opposition views it as a threat. Shapiro compares this situation to the actions of Kim Jong-un in North Korea, where he routinely drops nuclear tests and then asks for payment from the West to avoid further aggression. The podcast then shifts to the situation in Ukraine, where the country is facing an all-out invasion from Russia. NATO Secretary General Jan Stenberg warned that the Western military alliance should be prepared for bad news from Ukraine as it defends against Russia's invasion. Stenberg called on NATO members to ramp up the production of ammunition to support Ukraine. Shapiro emphasizes the need for the West to provide Ukraine with the necessary resources to defend its territory while looking for a diplomatic solution. Shapiro then transitions to a discussion about the left's focus on environmentalism and the push to phase out fossil fuels. He criticizes the left's prioritization of deindustrialization and redistributionism, arguing that it could lead to the impoverishment of many countries and make them more aggressive. He highlights the comments of the UAE climate chief, Sultan Al-Jaber, who expressed skepticism about the effectiveness of a fossil fuel phase-out and emphasized the need for a pragmatic approach to environmental policy. The podcast also touches on the recent expulsion of a member of Congress, George Santos, who is facing federal charges, including fraud and identity theft. The House voted to expel him, setting a precedent for removing members before they have been convicted of a crime. Shapiro raises concerns about the implications of this decision and the potential for it to be used as a political tool in the future. The podcast then delves into the political dynamics between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Shapiro discusses the Democrats' rejection of the term Bidenomics and their avoidance of using it in social media and press releases. He highlights the declining poll numbers for Joe Biden and the Democrats' reliance on strategies to paint Trump as a dictator and pursue criminal convictions against him. Shapiro also discusses the recent court rulings against Trump including a judge's decision that he is not immune from criminal prosecution in the January 6, 2020 case. Shapiro concludes the podcast by addressing the potential implications of a criminal trial for Trump in 2024, which could coincide with the presidential election. He discusses the possibility of Trump facing a trial in Washington, D.C., and the potential impact on his political future if he is convicted and sentenced to imprisonment.